Hello, and welcome to HHH, the podcast where we talk about those horrible humans in history. I am your host, Angela Pearson, and if you are new joining us for the first time on this episode, welcome. We are so excited to have you here, and by we, I mean me. I am so glad that you are tuning in, and if you have been with me from the beginning of this journey of mine, I appreciate you, and thank you for coming back. Thank you. And if you end up liking this podcast or you like this podcast, make sure you like and subscribe. Make sure you turn on the notifications because life can get a little bit crazy like last week. It's that time of year, kids are doing all of the activities to finish up the school year. So things are going to get a little bit crazy in the next couple months. But if you turn on the notification button, you will be notified anytime I upload an episode. So make sure you do that. Also, I have received a few recommendations. Thank you so much for those. I will be talking about those recommendations in the next few episodes. But if you have someone that you would like to recommend, please let me know. You can message me on this episode, or you could just message me on Facebook or Instagram. Just let me know who you want to hear about, because I want to talk about who you guys want to hear about. So please send me those recommendations. I love hearing those. And also don't forget to check out our new website, horriblehumansinhistory.com. You can listen to the episodes on our website, but you can also get merch if you're interested in getting anything with our cool logo on it. Feel free to jump on there and check it out. Anyways, with all of that done, let's jump in to today's episode. Today, we are talking about Helene Jegado, one of France's most prolific and chilling serial killers. A woman who worked as a domestic servant and used her position to poison the people who trusted her most. She lived in 19th century Brittany. And over the course of years, dozens of people died after eating meals that she had prepared. And at first, her crimes were hidden behind waves of illness and superstition, like most of the lady killers that we've talked about. But eventually, suspicion grew, and when the truth came out, it shocked all of France. So today, we are going to be exploring her whole life and her story. So if you've ever wondered what happens when a cook takes, quote, season to taste a bit too literally, well, buckle up, because we're about to talk about it. Here we go. Helene Jegado was born in 1803 in a tiny farmhouse in Lochonek. We're just going to butcher that name. It's a speck on the map in Brittany, France, near Lorraine. Brittany was a rural region in the northwestern France that's known for its really strong traditions and deep-rooted folklore. At this point in history, France is still catching its breath after the revolution, with Napoleon about to crown himself as emperor. So people are still living in a bunch of turmoil, not really knowing what's going to happen. Because if you know the story of Napoleon, which I'm sure we'll cover him at some point, he was back and forth as emperor a couple times. So things were a little crazy in France at this point in time. Her family was super poor. Helena is born into a very simple peasant family, the kind where everyone has to pitch in from dusk till dawn. They have to work together in order to survive. Think really muddy fields, livestock, and probably a lot of boiled cabbage. That's the life that she was living. Life in rural France at the time was very, very harsh, and opportunities were very limited, especially for women, and especially for women of lower classes. But tragedy struck really early in her life. She was just 7 years old when her mother died. And boom, just like that, Helene's world was flipped completely upside down because her father was presumably super overwhelmed with suddenly becoming the only parent. And he actually ended up sending her off to live and work with two of her aunts who are servants at the rectory in Burberry near the village. So he was overwhelmed and he just said, you know what? Your aunts will take care of you. Go live with them. So she gets sent off when she's super young. Now, rectory life in the early 19th century in Brittany was not exactly a playground. It wasn't a nice, warm, amazing place to be living in. Helene was thrust into a world of domestic servant, like becoming a domestic servant as a child. So this literally becomes her entire life, is being a servant. She scrubbed floors, she helped in the kitchen and ran errands for the priests. And this area at the time was very religious, super, super religious, with folklore everywhere. So not only were people religious, but they were also pretty superstitious at this time. And there were even tales of the Anko, which is basically a grim reaper figure who collects souls in a creaky cart. It sounds terrifying. Can you just imagine something like that walking down the road? So people were believing that this was real. And some say that Helene actually really soaked up these stories, basically like a sponge. She loved that kind of stuff and really believed those stories. She thought they were real. And some people even think that her later crimes, she believed that she was actually doing the work of this Anuk, whatever, however you say his name. But as a child, she was just in survival mode, and these stories gave her a way to escape and believe in something bigger than herself. So at this point, she was orphaned by her mother and abandoned by her father. So she was pretty much alone in the world. Like, she was living with aunts. Her aunts were some of the servants that she was working with. But she was pretty alone, and psychologists later speculated that this, quote, abandoned child syndrome might have actually planted the seed for her future crimes and killings. But there's a lot of kids that lose parents and don't turn into serial killers. So anyways, by all accounts, when she was younger, though, she was very pious, super quiet, and learned the basics of cooking and the household management from her aunts. So there were no really big major red flags yet. It was just kind of a tough start to her life, and she could have gone either way at this point. So it doesn't necessarily mean your circumstances have to determine who you are. There are definitely choices involved, and she made some interesting choices. So as a child, there were no confirmed reports of any kind of violent behavior from her, but there are constant descriptions of her personality being very strange. Like, she came across as a very peculiar child, very, very different. She was withdrawn and very difficult to understand. I personally, when I was reading about her, I pictured her being the kind of child that's like really shy and kind of weird and just kind of mumbled and was nervous whenever you talk to them. I was a mumbler as a child, so I kind of picture like her just being super duper awkward and just very shy and withdrawn, because she had these attachment issues, but she was known to be quite intense when you did interact with her, and people often described her as having an unsettling presence. And I'm wondering if people described her as that way before or after they found out what she did. I would be interested to know, if these people said this after they found out what she did, or if they just genuinely believed she had an unsettling presence before all of this. Be interesting to know. Anyways, moving on. In her teen years, Helena sticks around the Burberry Rectory for about 17 years total. So she was there into her early 20s. So that's a pretty long stint for a kid who started at 7. So she was 7 years old until 20 years old working at this rectory as a servant. But she decided it was time to move on. So she started moving between households, cooking and cleaning in exchange for wages and shelter. And in the 19th century France, domestic servants were often housed inside the home of their employers, meaning that they had very intimate access to the daily life, including food preparation. So she really honed her skills as a servant, getting really good at the behind the scenes stuff, like keeping the household running. The town of Brittany's culture really influenced her as well. It influenced her big time. It's very rural. It's got a Catholic to the core. And like I mentioned, lots of superstition. So mix that all together and you've got Brittany France. She becomes infatuated with religion in her life, like obsessed, like to the point of being a little, and she was dreaming of maybe becoming a nun or something, holier than thou. That's kind of the attitude she had. So she was really thinking maybe one day she would become a nun. But around the age of 24 in the late 1820s, she decided instead to pack up and moved to Seglin with her aunt. This is where she lands a gig as a cook for a local parish priest. So this access to food actually becomes central to her crimes. I am curious if she never became a cook or a servant that cooked the food, because she wasn't always strictly the cook. Would she have done what she did? I'm sure she probably would have, but again, more speculation. There's a lot of speculation in this episode. Just a warning. Just because I'm curious about the nitty-gritty details, but they're hard to find at this point in time. But anyways, this is a kind of funny part of the story. It gets a little quirky right here because this happens before all of the drama, like the real drama happens. Apparently, Helena gets accused of spiking the priest's soup as a prank at some point, which is super interesting because whatever she used, it wasn't lethal and she totally denied it. But the incident really hints that this could have been her experimenting with additives pretty early on. So it shows that she was experimenting with getting things in food to see if people noticed, even though it was a silly prank and she got caught and she denied it. Like, it's hinting at something else that comes later because no one died in this, but it's our first glimpse. I don't know what a glimpse is. Sorry, guys. I have a baby that stays up all night, so you get what you get. Our first glimpse at her meddling in the kitchen. And as a teen and a young adult, she started bouncing between servant jobs. Well, not as a teen, as a young adult. She started bouncing between the servant jobs, and she started building a pretty solid reputation as a very reliable, but perhaps a bit odd worker. She was very pious, and she also had a side of mischief to her. So she was a holier than thou, but she, like I said, she pulled pranks. So she was kind of an odd bird, but she had a very reliable reputation. People knew that they could count on her and she would get the work done. Now, she hasn't committed any crimes at this point, but the foundations are being set at this point in her life. She's mobile. She's in people's homes. She has access to all their food. And she seems to be a bit off, a little different. Now, another important thing to understand about the area of Brittany during this time is that it was a place full of superstition and religion, and it really shaped how people understood illness and death. Sudden sickness was often attributed to fate or divine punishment or mysterious natural causes. So, this is important context to know when we're starting to talk about Helene's crimes and why it took so dang long for anyone to notice. Because in this particular area that she's in, death is very superstitious and it has to be fate or divine intervention or something. So this environment really helped Helene's actions to be hidden for years. So let's fast forward a little bit to her late 20s and into her early 30s. Helene's fully in the domestic servant game at this point. Like, this is her life. This is the direction she is going. She's not going to become a nun. She's just going to be a servant for the rest of her life. This was the era when servants were essential for middle class and upper class households. The servants did all the cooking, cleaning, and basically ran the whole household while they seemed to blend in with the wallpaper. You know, think Downton Abbey. If you haven't seen Downton Abbey, I recommend it. But if you have, think Downton Abbey, where the servants live in the household. They're doing all the things, but they have to blend into the background. They cannot stand out. No one can notice that they're there, but they're there. They're everywhere. Now, Helene had become very good at the blending into the wallpaper. She got really good at service, but she got really good at basically being an invisible servant. Or at least she was very employable, despite some kind of small bumps along the way, which we'll talk about in a second. But in 1833, at the age of 30, she was working for Father Francois. There we go. It's like, I know how to say this. For Father Francois Dogo in the village of Gurin. Here is a good way to look at Helene, okay? If Helene were a modern day character, she'd be that coworker who brings treats to the office all the time. So she tried really hard to get along with people, but she was just so off. Now she's working for Father Francois Ledrago. She's the coworker bringing these treats to work, but there is a twist to her treats now. Over just 3 months, 7 people in Father Francois Ledrago's household dropped dead. 7 people. The priest himself died. His elderly parents died. A visiting priest died. Another maid. And get this, Helene's own sister, Annie, who had come to visit, also died. Yeah, that's right. She killed her own sister. So she went from 0 to 1,000 super quickly. Super duper quickly. And what was her method? I mean, it's that time period, we've talked about a few of the poisoning murderesses of this time period, so I'm guessing you could probably guess what tool she used, but I will tell you, in case you haven't listened to those episodes, which you should do. It was arsenic, the serial killer's best friend back then. Now, it was really easy to get because it was used in rat poison, in some medicines, which is scary, and even wallpaper. So she could easily slip that into soups or stews or tea or whatever it is, any kind of liquid. She could easily slip that in. And the symptoms were super nasty. They were vomiting, diarrhea, and then organ failure. So the early deaths really looked like cholera or gastric fever, which was the perfect cover in the 1830s. At this point in history, those were both running rampant. So everyone chalks up bad luck or chalks it up to this epidemic. No one suspected anything, even though 7 people, like bam, 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 bam. No one suspected anything. Helena even nursed them, playing that devoted servant. Where have we heard that before? Where it's just like, oh, I shall care for you, but I am the one killing you. So, she reportedly said once, quote, "Wherever I go, people die." But at the time, no one even batted an eye at this comment. It was just like, yeah, everywhere I go, everyone seems to die. And everyone's like, yeah, that's so sad for you. No one questioned, like, well, maybe you're killing people. It's very interesting that with every single one of these women that we've talked about, they behaved the exact way, same way. I don't know if you've noticed that. They're always like, oh, I'm going to nurse you back to health. I'm going to take care of you. I want all the praise and like, I'm going to be the sweetest, most caring person. And everyone thinks that. And no one suspects them at all. Like, no one is suspicious of them at all. And to quote my 14-year-old, those cheeky buglets, like, what the heck? How did they get away with this? And she gets away with it too. So these are the first suspected poisonings linked to Helena. Next came a dinner party where she was in charge of making all the food. Now, many people got ill and a few people actually died at this dinner party. And at the time, again, no one accused her. Food poisoning was also very common at this time because refrigeration wasn't super great. I think they were using ice at this point in time. They didn't really have refrigerators. So a lot of food often just sat out. And let's be honest, hygiene wasn't the best either at this time. No one really knew that germs caused illness until the 1860s, 1880s. So it would make a lot of sense that they could also blame these illnesses on food poisoning because that was also very common. But unfortunately, death was super common and tragically ordinary at this time. So no one questioned it. I think nowadays people would question, but the pattern repeated. Her victims aren't random, by the way. They're all employers or colleagues or family. And unlike some of the other details that we have about who poisoned the people around them, Helena had no financial gain. So, unlike other women we've talked in the past that get like life insurance policies or they stand to inherit, she gets none of that. She's just an invisible servant doing this. What does she get out of this, though? What were her motives? Mostly just spite, or she just got a thrill out of it. It's hard to say at this point. But soon she actually would return to Burberry, where she grew up with her aunts. And wouldn't you know it, 3 more deaths occurred. One of the victims was one of her aunts this time. So she's killed a sister, and now she's killed an aunt. And then she moved on to Lachmene, where her landlady and one of the landlady's daughters died very soon after Helene made them some of her special soup. One of the sons actually got sick, but he survived. Probably because he was really wise and refused her care once he got sick. He just took care of himself and he got better. By 1835, she had racked up at least 17 suspected victims already. She was fired from a convent in Ari for, quote, vandalism and sacrilege. So not for killing people, but for vandalism and sacrilege. Not entirely what she did for the sacrilege part. Maybe she was carving doodles into the church pews or swapping holy water with vinegar. I don't know. She was a prankster, so it's hard to say. But she just kept moving, and she went from Pontvy to Laurent to Port Louis onto Ploumir. She hits a rhythm at this point. She gets hired. She plays super nice. People start to like her. She poisons subtly, acts concerned as they slowly waste away. And then she moves jobs after people have been killed. There was also a moment that she had a klepto streak as well. She was stealing linens and cash, which eventually would lead to her being quietly dismissed. Remember those small bumps in her career? That's what it was. She was stealing things. I mean, she was also murdering people, but no one noticed the murdering, but they did notice the things going missing. So from 1841 to 1849, jobs came and jobs went, and so did the bodies. One heartbreaking case in 1841 at the Chateau des Soys, she actually poisoned a little girl, little Marie Brigier. She was a young child. Why did she poison this child? There's actually no clear reason. Helena just later said killing her gave her a sense of power. Just killing gives her a sense of power. I don't know why killing a child would give her sense of power, but in a way, I can kind of see why she would crave power. For a woman, especially a woman who was a servant in a home, they didn't have a lot of options at this point in time. Women didn't have the freedoms, especially lower class women, especially the servants. Her life was pretty much handed to her at 7 years old, and she was told, you are going to be a servant, and that's all you can be your whole life. She had no control over her life. She didn't have any kind of power to say where she went, what job she did. She just had to survive on how she knew to survive, which was being a servant. But she found a way to feel some kind of power and control over others. Unfortunately, that meant that she was killing them. So, anyways, that's my rant. I think I can understand why she would want power, but I think she chose the wrong avenue to feel that power. So, anyways, back to the story. So things go pretty quiet on the murder front for a while. There were no new deaths for a couple years, but she did get caught stealing a few times. So she did serve a short jail stint. So that probably had a role in her not murdering anyone. So maybe just a little bit. By 1849, she's in Rennes, a bigger city with a lot more new opportunities. Because remember, at this point, it's really hard to keep track of people. There's no digital anything at this point. Like, keeping track of people is pretty difficult. So if you just left and went to a much bigger city where no one knows you, your opportunities opened up quite a bit. And that's what she did. So she hit a rhythm, like I said. She gets hired, plays nice, all of that kind of stuff. So A lot of her victims were, people, I think I mentioned this already, but they were people that had hired her, but they were also people who had trusted her. Like, they'd known her over the years. It was families who gave her work, communities that actually welcomed her in, and even children she was responsible for feeding, like clergy members, neighbors. And that portrayal is one of the most disturbing aspects of her story, is she wasn't a stranger lurking in the darkness. She was actually living inside of these people's homes, and they trusted her. Like, it was just this invisible person they trusted to provide them with safe food, and she didn't do it. And many of the victims had identical symptoms. They had violent vomiting, severe stomach pain, rapid decline, and death within days of eating her food. And I'm sure you wouldn't guess this based on all the other lady poisoners, but the case, like I said, the cause was arsenic. And she moved frequently between all of these jobs in the new city as well, because entire families were being struck by mysterious illness, and it was after the meals she had prepared. So she moved really frequently, even though she had just moved to this new town. And historians believe that she may have murdered dozens of people, through only a handful of deaths were legally proven. They think that she had killed way more people than she was actually charged with. And speaking of legal issues, for years, people actually did suspect her of doing these murders, but no one formally charged her. But eventually, one household actually noticed something chilling. People who did not eat her food did not get sick. And that observation would change everything. It just takes one person to notice something off. And that's what this was. In 1850, Helena lands this job in Renee with Theophila Bedard. He was a law professor at the university. This was a very fancy gig, probably the nicest house she was ever going to work in. They had a very, very large house with a very big staff. And first, one of the servants, Rose Tessier, fell ill under Helena's care. Vomiting, pain, all of the symptoms. And she would die soon after. Then, one of the daughters of the household, Rosalie Sarrazin, started feeling ill and getting the same symptoms just like Rose, and she died soon after. The household was buzzing with gossip at this point. Can you imagine? Like, again, Downton Abbey, all the talking. And 2 deaths in quick succession was kind of a big deal in the household. And Rosalie even accused Helena on her deathbed. But the best part of this was when the doctor actually started asking questions. He wasn't even talking to Helena herself, but Helena actually turned and blurted, I haven't done anything, before anyone had even talked to her or pointed a finger at her. And that didn't come across as suspicious at all. Tell me you're guilty without telling me you're guilty kind of thing. So, not surprising, after that incident, suspicion skyrocketed for Helena. The family actually consented to having an autopsy on Rosalie. They were able to find massive amounts of arsenic everywhere in her body. Now the police decided to start digging into Helena's past, and noticed a pretty consistent pattern. Again, we mentioned it, the job after job, and they also noticed, death after death. They exhumed some of the bodies from the recent years of the deaths in the households that she had been in, and surprise, surprise, they found more poison. So witnesses described her behavior as calm and detached, even as people died around her. Sounds just like a killer. But she was arrested on July 1st, 1851. At the age of 48, her run was finally over. They finally caught her. And there's no dramatic chase or anything, just her mouth getting ahead of her brain. Like, literally her yelling, "I haven't done anything," is basically what did it. So the trial started on December 6th, 1851 in Rennes. Due to France's 10-year statute of limitations and spotty evidence, she was only charged with 3 murders, 3 attempts, and 11 thefts. So that was not the full tally of her crimes, but they kind of had their hands tied with the statute of limitations. But it was more than enough. So Helene's courtroom behavior is best described as wild. Yeah. She would be muttering humbly, because she's holier than thou, and then suddenly start shouting piously at people and then raging. So she went through these crazy extremes. She denied everything. She even pretended not to know what arsenic was. Like, literally playing the dummy, like, I don't even know what you're talking about. Like, arsenic? I've never even heard of that. But there was a chemist that was able to testify and testified that all the victims were killed with arsenic poisoning. And what was her defense? Her lawyer, this is amazing, pleads for mercy, claiming that Helene has cancer and needs time to repent. So that was her defense. They didn't really deny that she did it, but it was more of a like, don't let her die and go to hell because she needs to repent before we kill her. So be kind. But the jury didn't buy it. She showed very little emotions during the proceedings at the trial. Observers noted her eerie composure. They determined that she was guilty on all counts. And courtrooms were absolutely filled with spectators. Newspapers covered every single detail of the case, and the idea that a quiet servant woman had poisoned so many people shocked the public. And her trial was so big that it was only overshadowed by Napoleon III's coup in Paris. Isn't that crazy? Like, it took a coup happening to override how popular her trial was. Now, she was convicted of multiple counts of murder, although authorities really did suspect that there were way more victims. Only certain cases had enough evidence for legal conviction, and she was sentenced to death by France's favorite way to put people to death. Can you guess it? Shout it in the back. What is it? The guillotine. You are right. It's France's go-to for executions up until the 1970s. Did you know that? They were still executing people with the guillotine when Star Wars came out. Fun fact. Anyways, on February 26th, 1852, in the town of Rennes, Champ-de-Mars, a huge crowd gathered, because remember, this was like the story. And Helene, ever pretending to be the pious, holier-than-thou one, calmly climbed the scaffold and shared prayers with the priest, and then, shoink, the blade descended. She was 49 years old. No last words of remorse, just acceptance. Her head was in a basket. Her body was buried unceremoniously. And that ended an era of Brittany's deadliest servant. Now, that is Helene's story in a nutshell. And it's interesting that a life of quiet chaos, because remember, she was abandoned as a child. She was raised into service. Like, that's all she knew. And she went on to murder with arsenic, and it's just crazy that someone so quiet could do so much damage. But anyways, so her case actually helped change how authorities investigated suspicious deaths in France. It really highlighted the danger of arsenic poison and contributed to improvements in forensic investigation. So her case did help in the future. Her story also shatters all assumptions about who could commit serial murder, because she did not fit the violent criminal stereotype of her time. Like, first of all, she was a woman. No one ever suspected women. And that's, I think, still a little bit of the case. Like, if you hear about a serial killer, your first thought is not, I bet it's a woman. You usually think it's a man, because it just doesn't fit the stereotype. And especially because she was a servant. Servants were people that should be trusted. These were the people who ran basically other people's lives. So she did not fit this. So it blew that stereotype away. And today, she is remembered as one of France's most notorious female serial killers, a figure who operated quietly in domestic spaces where people felt the safest. So that is our story for the day. It's Helena, our horrible human in history. Thanks so much for listening, guys. I hope you enjoyed this story. If you did, make sure you like, make sure you're subscribing, and make sure you have the notifications turned on so you can be notified whenever I upload a new episode. And be sure you're sending me suggestions. I have a couple that I will be talking about very soon. So thank you all for sending me these suggestions. I really appreciate it, because like I've said many times, I want to talk about who you guys want to hear about. I'm happy to do the research for you, so you don't have to do it. But next episode, it's crazy, guys. It has been 2 years since I started this podcast. Isn't that wild? I know last year was kind of a off year because I was having a baby and things just got crazy, but it's been 2 years. Isn't that wild? Oh, cheers for me and my husband. My husband's my producer, and he is actually going to be joining me. My amazing husband is going to go through last year's killers with me, and we're going to identify the worst of the worst. So we're going to review the last year and who we think is the worst serial killer, who was the worst cult leader. We're going to talk about who was the worst dictator, all of those things. And then at the very end of the episode, we're going to talk about, out of all the horrible humans I have talked about over the last 2 years, who our top 3 worst people are. So join us next week. If you haven't heard that episode, me and my husband did this last year on the year anniversary. I think this is what we're going to do every year, because he is a trooper and listens to all of these, even though he does not like murdery stuff. He is a champ because he is just so supportive and listens to this. So make sure you tune into that episode. It's going to be fun. I will want your guys' comments on that episode to see who you guys think is the worst that we've talked about, because I do want your guys' opinions. So make sure you listen and decide who's the worst dictator we've talked about, who's the worst killer we've talked about, serial killer, who's the worst cult leader. Let's see, we'll do one more. Who was the worst just killer overall? Who do you think is the worst overall? But we will see you next week. I look forward to talking about all of the horrible people we've talked about. So I will see you guys next week on Horrible Humans in History.